Ahojte moji milí druháci, vítam vás na ďalšej hodine. V prípade Bčky a Cčky už máte štvrtok, samozrejme ja to nahrávam dopredu ako tradične v nedeľu. V prípade druhej D, ak ste si to zapli, tak máte, možno ste sa zapli na zopakovanie hodiny, ktorú ste dúfam, že mali a že vyšla s našim praktikantom, ktorý tu bol. V podstate ďakujem vám za zaslanie vašich prác v nedeľu. Kto samozrejme to nestihol o 8, tak bohužiaľ máte za 5. Tí, čo ste stihli, máte všetko vyplnené, máte odkazy, tak máte bez problémov jednotky. My takto teda tým pádom ideme na ďalšiu tému, ktorú máme v poradí, a to je stredovek. No, poznámky nájdete, viete, že Rímanom napríklad ste našli len ten dotazník, ale taký pracovný list, ale v prípade stredoveku by ste mali mať, ak si dobre pamätám, všetko. Znovu môžu byť rozdiely, že niekde pribudli obrázky. Myslím, že dnes stihneme, alebo nie dnes, tak budúcu hodinu pôjdeme na prvú tému, ktorú nemám spracovanú, ešte som zatiaľ nestihol spraviť tému v PowerPointe, ale budete ju mať vo Worde, a to sú ríše raného stredoveku. No a v podstate, čo potrebujete vedieť ďalej, je, že ďalšie témy máme samozrejme spracované znovu v assignment plague task, ktorú máte. Termín vám ešte nejdem dať, môžem vám povedať, že to bude nám trvať možno aj, môj odhad je možno aj 2 mesiace. Sice dnes ten úvod by som rád stihol prebehnúť, ale ďalšie hodiny, či arabský kalifát, či byzantská ríša alebo franská ríša, sú podľa mňa každá minimálne na 1 hodinu. No a ďalšiu tam tému máme ešte z raného stredoveku, a to sú Slovania a Veľká Morava, čiže starí Slovania, Slováci, počiatky Slovákov a Nitrianske Moravské kniežatstvo a Veľká Morava. Toto je takisto na niekoľko hodín a myslím, že máte teda dosť času, čiže môžete si dať od dejepisu trošku oddych, ale potom sa pustíte znovu priebežne do ďalšieho zadania, ktoré je zase iné, je tak ako z minulého roku, ale pár drobností som tam zmenil. Takže ja som vám ho zavesil samozrejme na našu stránku, čiže tak ako máte odpovede, môžete odpovedať, a som vám zavesil, ak neviete, kde presne sú, tradične v zložke Files, čiže u vás asi zložky v skupine, no sú tieto, že Middle Ages, tak všeobecne som to nazval. V skutočnosti to nie je Middle Ages, ako dnes uvidíte v prezentácii. Musíme aj obrázok už zmeniť, Sandra mi už aj namalovala nejakých rytierov, že idete na stredovek, takže hádam sa mi to čoskoro podarí. No a ukážem vám v PDF-ku, že ako to vyzerá, čo tam máte teda robiť. No, máte tu popis, samozrejme poznámky, z ktorých prezentácií máte čerpať, nie je to nič hrozné, sú to v podstate iba 3, ktoré myslím, že celkom podrobne pôjdeme dokopy. Nezabudnite samozrejme udávať zdroje, ak vám chýbali napríklad teraz, tak môže to byť problém. Tu bude väčší problém, pretože nie všetko bude v poznámkach, a náschvál sú tie aktivity trošku také, ako boli pri praveku možno. Čiže s kreslením znovu budete mať, ale nebojte sa, nehodnotím vaše skills nejaké, že ako viete kresliť, naopak skôr je také, že obsahovo, že naznačiť nejaký symbol, a to bude iné. Čo tam máte prvé? Prvé budete mať taký vertikálnu časovú os, ktorú som trošku tak porozťahoval, a sem máte perom dopísať udalosti, no a ku každej som vám napísal presne, že čo boli aké milníky. Čiže toto musíte splniť, to presne porátam, odfotiť, ideme ďalej. No, všetky 3 témy, ktoré tu máme, alebo respektíve 2 veľké témy, sú v podstate rozdelené v tom ranom stredoveku, a ja som vám vyhodil takúto tabuľku, ktorú ja mám veľmi rád, a vytváram vám taký prehľad. My totiž to pôjdeme po tom úvode na jednotlivé tie témy, tie ríše Arabov, Byzantíncov, Frankov a starých Slovanov, ale pôjdeme ich chronologicky každej v tej jednotlivej téme. Čiže od vás budem chcieť, aby ste dokopy 30 udalostí, nie pre každé, ale dokopy všetkého 30 by malo byť udalostí pre arabský kalifát, tie, čo sú z poznámok, tak samozrejme hneď si to vyplňate do tabuľky, Byzantskú ríšu, deto Fransku ríšu, aj Slovanov. Takto budete vidieť, že napríklad v 8. alebo v 10. storočí, že ako sa asi vyvíjali tie jednotlivé krajiny a aký tam bol vývoj. Čiže toto by nemal byť problém. Možno problém prekvapení pre vás bude, že mimo poznámok tých Slovanov máte tam už od roku 1000. Dôvod je ten, že hlavne Byzantská ríša, arabský kalifát posúvam až do až do aj vrcholného a neskorého stredoveku. Takže vy si kľudne môžete vybrať nejaké zaujímavé, vyhľadať, že ako Franská ríša od roku 834, ako sa vyvíjal na dve časti, tak môžete sem nejaké udalosti vpichnúť. Rovnako pre Slovákov, že napríklad už sme od roku 1000 boli v Uhorskom kráľovstve svätého Štefana a tak ďalej a tak ďalej. Nemusíte to celé samozrejme vyplňať, hlavne aby bolo tých 30 udalostí. Tí, ktorých to baví, tak samozrejme you are allowed to do that. No a už tu máte rôzne veci. Infografika. Infografiky sú veci, ktoré máte, neviem, hodíme si napríklad, skúsme napríklad tú Byzantskú ríšu, že by ste ju hľadali, takže Byzantine Empire. No a napríklad cez Wikipédiu, keď si kliknete, alebo aj v takomto náhľade na Google máte vlajku, mapky, popis, obyvateľstvo z roku 1282, zaujímavé nejaké veci. No a takéto niečo možno by som od vás chcel, ešte vám to ukážem na Wikipédii, aby ste vypracovali, čiže nejaké znaky a tak ďalej a nejaké údaje. A od vás takéto niečo budem chcieť práve tu. Čiže máte práve pre tieto tri štáty, ktoré sú v tom úvodnom, vypísať aj údaje, ktoré sú ako jazyky, napríklad náboženstvo, hlavné mesta, čiže veci, ktoré ja v poznámkach možno ani nebudem mať, určite nebudem mať niektoré veci, takže vy si ich tradične dohľadajte a skúste ich nejako pekne graficky znázorniť. Tu môžete, you can use IT, Information Technologies, takže tu môžete napríklad počítačovo vložiť nejaký obrazok, ktorý vyrobíte. O tomto ja nebudem napríklad nič hovoriť, 1001 noci, čiže myslím, že zaujímavá vec. Venn diagram, myslím, že sme už mali pri starovekých Grékoch, som zvedavý, ako ste si s ním poradili. No a Vennové diagramy znovu sú veci, kde sú rôzne veci a niektoré sa prekrývajú. A vy to máte zobraziť formou nejakých množín, kruhov, rôznych takýchto grafických geometrických symbolov, ktoré sa prelínajú a prekrývajú alebo majú tie prvky mimo. Ja som vám to na rozdiel oproti minuloročnému zadaniu hodil aj, že najmenej má byť 15 znakov judaizmu, kresťanstva a islamu. Veľmi zaujímavé, veľmi sa teším, čo vyberiete, lebo je tam toho dosť veľa. Samozrejme, ak budem vidieť, že sú úplne rovnaké, tak ja normálne vám budem škrtať nejaké body. Čiže buďte v tomto kreatívni, buďte v tomto originálni. Určite nekradnite ostatným myšlienky, nenechajte si ukradnúť myšlienky. Podstata nie je v tom, že to máte niekde okopírovať, ale máte niečo vymyslieť a zamyslieť sa. Čiže buďte lepší ako naši politici, ktorí s prácami to okopčujú. Samozrejme, ak využijete nejakú vec, že niekde nájdete veľmi pekný diagram, ktorým sa inšpirujete, sem hneď napíšete článok alebo Venn diagram about Byzantine Empire, available at, dáte link a dáte ešte dátum, ja neviem, že 20. marca 20 March 2021. Dobre, no a toto je krásna vec, pyramída stredoveku. No, budete vidieť niekoľko takýchto vecí, kde vám zobrazím pyramídy, hierarchiu stredovekej spoločnosti. Dosť to budem rozoberať dnes, pretože je to taká v podstate vec, ktorá ovplyvnila ten celý vývoj predtým, ale vychádzala aj zo staroveku. No a čo je pre mňa zaujímavé, tak ja chcem, aby ste tu nakreslili si kľudne paličkovo, nemusíte sa vôbec trápiť, kráľa, kráľovnú, knieža, biskupa, arcibiskupa, ale ako ho rozoznáte, paličkový alebo biskupský klobúk, berla so slimákom na kop, to každý z vás vie nakresliť, načrtnúť, nič iné. Musia mať nejaké insignie, alebo oblečenie, alebo náradie, čiže ak je sedliak, no tak jednému dáte do ruky motiku, ďalšiemu, ja neviem, hrable a tak ďalej. Máte rytiera, tak mu dáte nejaký meč, alebo koňa napríklad, hej. Baníka, tak mu dáte banický čakan alebo lampáš, dobre? Čiže niečo také, ja samozrejme nebudem vám hodnotiť to, že ako je to pekne nakreslené alebo presne, ale skôr to, že tam nebude mať, ja neviem, zbíjačku z 20. storočia alebo že tam nehodíte niečo zo staroveku, dobre? Čiže dôležité je, že čo títo všetci, ktorí tu boli, aj Clergy, Town Folks a tak ďalej, že čo mohli oni typické mať. Môžete k nim niečo nakresliť, aby som videl, že odkiaľ sú. Takže it must be realistic, not real. Čiže má to byť realistické, ale nie je skutočné. Čiže môžete sa odviazať. Kratučké veci, aj na písanie by ste mali kreslenie, kým by ste chceli byť, nechceli byť v stredoveku, ale veľmi krátko, nemáte tam veľa miesta. Rovnako fiktívny deň v stredoveku, niekoho z takýchto ľudí, môžete si aj vlastnú postavu vymyslieť, ale dôležité je, niektorých máte známych veľkých, niektorých máte takých, že accused witch Anča v Krupina, hej, že odsúdená striga Anča z Krupiny, alebo minor Ignatius of Piarg, baník Ignác z Piargu a tak ďalej, ale napríklad knieža Vlad Tepeš, alebo dávač možno aj a tak ďalej. Čiže môžete si vybrať, vymysliť si a v podstate ide o to, že máte si vymyslieť myslím, že dvoch som vám napísal. Imagine one day in life of these guys. Čiže kde to píšem? You can make up your own character. Pick up two. A dobre, čiže tu sú, že vyberte si dvoch. Čiže do polovice približne kratučký deň, alebo taký rutinný deň, jedno z týchto postov, alebo si vymyslíte. No, toto ste robili už v prípraveku, že ste si mali navrhnúť svoje vlastné nejaké osídlenie a to isté vás čaká aj tu v stredoveku, čiže toto už viete. Tu máte rozdiel v tom, že to medieval settlement má byť buď a town, a village or a castle. No a máte aj mapku nejakú nakresliť, add geography with toponymy names, čiže máte si vymyslieť nejaké veci. Write something about history of the settlement, draw its architectural ground plan. Rôzne veci tu máte, že aj obyvateľstvo, organizácie a tak ďalej. O čo ide, decká? Tuto je knižka, ktorá je asi jedna z najmega, ktoré boli kedy na Slovensku stredoveku napísané. Tu na stránke Fórum histórie, čo je stránka Historického ústavu Slovenskej akadémie vied, máte takúto publikáciu, že lexikon stredovekých miest na Slovensku. Táto iba 600-stranová kniha nie je nikde k dispozícii na kúpenie. Môžete si ju iba v takých vychytených knižniciach prezenčne vypožičať, čiže študovať iba tam a nesmiete si ju požičať. A v podstate vám zobrazuje veľmi podrobné stredoveké dejiny najvýznamnejších stredovekých miest na Slovensku. Je to v podstate fantastická vec, lebo keď si už len pozriete, že Bela, Bystrica, Štianica, Bardejov, Beckov, Breznov, Bratislava, okrem v podstate tých nových miest, čo ste z Partizanského alebo zo Žiaru nad Hronom, tak asi tam nebudete. Ale máte tu Prievidzu napríklad, Pukanec, Rimavská Sobota, čiže úžasné veci a pozrite si, decka, ako sú napísané. Schválne si pozrieme napríklad, čo som to Štiavnicu skúsime, nie som si istý, či si pamätám, áno, pamätám si presne dátum, strana, ktorá tu je. O Banskej Štiavnici máte spísané také, že názov, všetky názvy, ale podľa historických prameňov, ako boli spísané, aká je etymológia toho názvu, či je pôvod, poloha mesta, prírodné podmienky. Skúste si prečítať tieto veci. Chotár, kde išiel, najstaršie osídlenie, formovanie mesta, mestské právo, udalosti, richtári, stavebný vývoj, architektúra, kostoly, hradby. No fantastické veci, významné udalosti, čisto iba pre stredovek. Pozrite si. A demografické etnické pomery, čiže aké obyvateľstvo to bolo, ako na to prišli, hospodárske aktivity, či čím sa živili. Skúste si nejaké takéto mestečko alebo vaše prečítať, čo tam všetko je a skúste si vymyslieť, ani zďaleka takto obsiahlo to nechcem, pretože Štiavnica má mega dejiny, Bystrica a ostatné tie významné stredoveké, najmä banské mesta, osobnosti mesta, ale skúste sa tak inšpirovať a vymyslieť si svoj vlastný. Nemusí to byť len mesto, môže to byť aj hrad, môže to byť aj dedina, rovnako ako lexikon stredovekých miest, tak rovnako tu by ste mali nájsť aj lexikon stredovekých hradov na Slovensku. Takže môžete sa inšpirovať a môžete to takto spracovať. No, čo som ešte chcel? Any form is possible, poster is recommended. Čiže nechám na vás, rovnako môžete zase IT využiť, kresliť, koláž spraviť, môžete urobiť plagátik v niečom nejakom. Samozrejme tak, aby to bolo nejaké pekné. Hej, predstavte, že by to niekde v múzeu, fiktívne múzeu malo byť vidno. Ak sa vám nechce vymýšľať, decka, kľudne si spracujte vašu obec, vašu dedinku alebo aj vaše mestečko. A takýmto spôsobom, kľudne s využitím tohto zdroja, si môžete spraviť nejaký takýto grafický nejaký plagát, že kde čo bolo. OK, ďalšie. No a potom ideme tretia téma, ktorá je o Slovanoch. A viete, že slovenské dejiny preberáme po slovensky, čiže my tam switchneme, na slovenčinu. No a takisto podľa toho, ako pôjdeme, tak budete musieť vypracovať tieto všetky veci, ktoré tu sú. Myslím, že tam nie je žiadna taká vec náročná, možno zaujímavá vec, ja myslím, že je veľmi ľahké. No a dal som vám ešte jednu vec, ktorá je veľmi podobná k tomu, čo ste robili s právekom. A to, že nájsť lokalitu. Teraz od vás, keďže ste tam mnohí boli nešťastní, že musíte ísť na slniečko, na čerstvý vzduch a že, ja neviem, bola zima, teraz vám bude vadiť, že je blato alebo že príliš slnko svietí, takže nemusíte ísť von, ale kto chcete, určite choďte a môžete mi zdokumentovať tak ako minule využitie nejakej lokality. Teraz je to trošku iné, pretože existuje stránka, ktorá sa volá, že hradiska.sk, majú na Facebooku veľmi akčný, sú dosť veľkú vec a veľkú stránku, ale o čo ide je to, že Táto stránka v podstate vznikla ako občianske združenie, ktoré malo revitalizovať náleziska rôznych slovanských hradísk, ktoré vidíte, že máte kade tade, aj okolí Detvy napríklad, Levíc a tak ďalej, Žiaruš, Zvolená samozrejme, aj okolo Štiavnice. No a to, čo ste mali nájsť nejaké nálezisko, mnohí ste našli, že aj stredovek, pravek a tak ďalej. Mne sa to popravde až tak niektoré nepáči, lebo ste urobili tak, že ste išli a odfotili ste nejaký múr. Vyhľadajte teraz vyslovene z tohto obdobia slovanského, najbližšie. Nemusíte tam ísť, len si vyhľadajte informácie a skúsite navrhnúť, že čo by sa s tým dalo robiť. Je tam veľmi veľa hradov, ktoré sú aj zo stredoveku, ale pôvod môžu mať čo za Veľké Moravy, alebo kedy v 7. storočí napríklad, keď sa budovali tie prvé hradíska. Čiže s využitím tohto zdroja skúste dať nejaké základné informácie a zo stredoveku. Čiže nemusia to byť len Slovania, pretože mnohé obce vznikli až niekedy v 13. storočí, ale my sa ideme tomu tiež venovať. Čiže pokojne, decka, sa pustíte do tohto a hľadajte nejakú lokalitu a znovu napíšte. Čiže ak ste už mali nejakú, tak môžete ju rozpracovať podrobnejšie alebo vyhľadať nejakú inú. Máte dosť veľa času, počasie sa zlepšuje, čiže výhovorky žiadne nechcem počuť. Nenútim vás ich zvon, takže vôbec nemusíte sa báť, že teraz sa musíte vystaviť nejako epidémie alebo čo, vôbec absolútne nie, ale samozrejme, ak budete mať odfotené, bude to len dobré pre vás. Dobre? To je všetko. Myslím, že celkovo je to zadanie veľmi v pohode. Ak niekto šomre, že kresliť veľa alebo tak, nedal som vám žiadne videá teraz napríklad pozerať, ale v poznámkach potom ich musím ešte hodiť. Ak mi vydá čas, že by vystrelil motika, dokázal by som vaše zadania nejakým spôsobom vaše zadania rýchlo opraviť. Môžem vám ukázať aj na Gmaili, ako mi to dnes v nedeľu rastie, že ako mi posielate vaše zadania a že by som ich stihol, tak vám určite nejaké tie Wordové poznámky skúsim spracovať aj do formy tých prezentácií. Dobre, takže už mi posielate 9 správ, vidím je od vás. Dobre, myslím, že nám čas uteká, myslím, že viete, čo máte robiť, že tých 16 minút som vám dal. Takže poďme zvyšok hodiny, tých 40 niekoľko minút preberať za radom, čo tam máme na všetky poznámky. Čiže ako som vám ja uviedol aj v tých vašich vlastne poznámkach. Ideme teda na obdobie Middle Ages, čo znamená stredovek. Ten delíme na raný stredovek, ktorý ja som si sebe hodil do takéto zložky, kde sú teda Slovania. Stručne dejiny kresťanstva budeme na seminári preberať, ak si vyberiete dejepisný. No ale čo budeme, hlavné témy bude teda úvod do stredoveku, nejaké základné charakteristiky a spoločnosť, čiže to je dosť intenzívne, čo budete potrebovať vedieť. Potom budú takéto Wordové poznámky o arabskom kalifáte, byzantskej a franskej ríši. No vikingov už som hádzal do vrcholného, čo nie je celkom správne, takže asi ich možno ešte nejako prehodím do nejakých iných poznámok, uvidíme a ešte sa rozhodnem. No, každopádne. No a potom pôjdeme Slovanov, ktorých tiež máme vo forme Wordových poznámok, ale myslím, že nesmúte, sú dosť podrobné, takže nebudete musieť až toľko študovať. Poďme teda na tú prvú vec, ktorú máme, a to je Middle Ages Characteristics, aby som vám vysvetlil, čo to je raný, vrcholný a neskorý. Samozrejme, všetko bude v angličtine, so don't worry, we'll be okay, we'll be fine with this. So this is one of these like old presentations of mine, and again, combination of many varieties, so I had to adjust it for you, but for us it will be pretty enough. So there are like 24, but not, as you'll see, not very detailed information. Middle Ages, stredovek. It's a period between the fall of the Western Roman Empire, 476 AD, and 16th, 17th century approximately, especially in Eastern Europe. It is period that, as later historians realized, that possess one very distinctive feature, čiže takú odlišnú črtu, and it is called feudalism. If you remember, that this term used by Karl Marx, despite his Marxist historiography, is not very accepted, but in this way, just like with slaveholding and even landholding in Middle Ages, is really typical feature for that. So even non-Marxist historiography accepted that this phenomena, economic style of the state, form of the government, was typical for medieval states that we have, medieval society. It was based upon landholding, či držanie pôdy, and protective alliances. It means that you create You just distribute land to those people who are loyal to you and promise to protect you, to serve you, to fight for you. That's why we talk about these alliances between vassals, because all the vassals are guys who are obliged to follow you, to obey you, to help you anytime. And lords, lord is the one that you obey, okay? And some king, for example. Generally, we can also claim that it's kind of like this landholding system between nobility, čiže šľachta, and serfs. Šľachta in Slovak, we'll describe it. This is from German word Schlacht, Schlachten, which means to kill somebody, because these guys, nobility, noblemen, used to be warriors from Germanic, Slavic, or other tribes that actually dissoluted Roman Empire and based up these empires of early Middle Ages. Poslovenský stredovek. So let's move on and how to explain what does it mean, this term Middle Ages. Actually, of course, even today we don't know how this period will be called in 2,000 years later by historians. And at the time, it appeared later, and it happened approximately in 15th century when changes in thinking that we today call Renaissance and humanism. People realized that it's happening something new, something brand new. They call it the new age, new period, nový vek, okay, novovek. But they were actually restoring some ideas from ancient Greek and ancient Rome. Everything we had, individualism, freedom, democracy, republic, and so on. And these people from humanism and Renaissance were going back, were searching back for the information from antiquity, and they adored it, they admired it, that it was like the age of great thinking, and that was the first age, prvý vek, starovek, starý vek. So that's why they saw kind of a gap or different period between the fall of the Rome and their period of 15th century, and that's why they call it the Middle Age. Stredozem, Middle Earth. Okay, so it's Stredovek, Middle Age. Of course, sometimes it's even today it's been called not very appropriately, I would say, the Dark Ages, because at the time these humanistic scholars believed and saw that probably like spreading Christianity, building up this feudalism, it's something like that people had to listen to people who are not so educated, I would say. And despite universities and municipal law, still not many people were not literate. Actually, Romans or Greek peasants could read and write, and in Middle Ages, even like town lords were not able to do that mostly. So that's why they suppose it like symbolically, like the forces of darkness, barbarians, Germanic tribes, Slavic people overwhelmed the forces of light, Romans, Byzantines, Greeks, with their education, with geography, with history, with medicine. People had to search back again after 1,000 years again. Thanks to Arabs, it was restored, thanks to crusades. So in this way, I start to call it like the new period. Still, we need to divide it because we have also periodization for any long period in history. So in this way, we divide it in three easy periods that will also deal with the topics we have. And that's early Middle Ages, čiže ranný stredovek. Keď to napíšete s dvomi N, tak budete mať stredovek iba ráno. Ale už pred obedom nie, už to nebude stredovek. Čiže ranný stredovek znamená taký, že skorý, to skoršie obdobie, keď sa to vyvíja. It will be approximately by the year until the year 1000, more or less. Then we have high Middle Ages, vrcholný stredovek. Nedávno sa už aj hovorí o tom, že aj novovek, čiže modern period, ktorú máme od objavenia Ameriky, budeme hovoriť o tých milníkoch chvíľu tiež, tak tiež hovorím o early modern period, to bežne používam, ale aj high middle period, čo už bude, dajme tomu, 18. 19. storočie, a late modern period, čo sme aj my, že 20. storočie napríklad by to mohlo byť. But we are still in Middle Ages, so what is in here? High Middle Ages approximately between 1000 and 1250s. This is not very accurate because some changes have been done since the appearance of Gothic style, which is like late 12th century, Mongol invasion, rise of medieval towns, but it was very different in Italy, Germany, Hungary, for example, so our kingdom, Uhorské kráľovstvo, and later on in, let's say, Romania, okay, so it's late. And some of the dynasties appear that will be the sign of this late Middle Ages appearing at the beginning of new century, which is the 14th century. So this approximately plus minus. Then after this we have late Middle Ages, čiže neskorý stredovek. There are actually many interesting things because in early Middle Ages, as you'll see, there were states that don't exist anymore, like this Arabic Caliphate, Byzantine Empire, Francia, Slavic principalities. Still, people, for example, in Europe, were mostly like only spreading Christianity. Still, there were many pagan states with having their polytheistic religions, for example. The other thing was that, for example, peasants were just cutting down trees, woods, burning the soil, and actually exploiting new land. But when you plant this when you grow these plants every year, sooner or later, in a couple of years, you just mm, withdraw all the fertile things in there. So that's why approximately about the year 1000 we have beginning of what we call like two field agriculture, that they divided their land in two halves, and one land had was used during the year, and the other had like rest. So the grass was growing, they put some flock of sheep or goats on it. Of course, they were doing poos and fertilizing it, and the next year they just switched this like land field for the growing and the other for the pasture, and actually it helped them a lot. The other thing what happened about 1000 was that most of these old empires fell down, and brand new was what I call, which is not actually very accurate, national kingdoms appeared, like England, France, German Holy Roman Empire, Bohemia, Hungary, Poland, Kievan Rus, and so on. The other thing that Christianity spread it and really changed a lot. That was a period that also in many countries we have like long stable dynasties, like the Arpad dynasty, Piast, Plantagenet, Anjou, Capetians, and so on. So this was really interesting, and it lasted approximately by these years. And what happened? First, epidemic of Black Death, Mongol invasion. They killed millions of people. Then what appeared? From Italy and Germany, they start to spread so-called free royal towns or free cities. And it was a brand new thing in the structure of society, as you will see soon. And it dramatically changed those things. The other thing was that uh, this agriculture changed in a way that didn't divide it. No, they had these two fields land, but they divided in thirds. And one land was divided in spring plants or spring vegetables, the other like so-called winter vegetables, and one was having rest for all the year. They call it like three fields. I have to check out for look up for the proper name for this, but it's also allowed to increase population because they increase food production. The other thing what happened was that also another dynasties, that these great dynasties ended up, let's say between 1301, Przemysl, Piast, and Arpa dynasty died out. During 1 or 2 years, even their like female descendants. So suddenly there were many, many other dynasties, but already people start to hesitate whether one family, one house has right to rule in their kingdom, let's say. So they start to fight, and this period of late Middle Ages was typical that in most of the lands, most of the countries of Europe, there were many wars, many uprising and rebellions of nobility, kings fighting for the power, and even people were being rebel. And in some countries, they moved it mostly to kind of big reforms, like in Netherlands, in England, that even peasants were proclaimed to be free. And on the other hand, in many countries, like in our country, in Hungary or in Poland, and in Russian principalities, they actually bounded these peasants to kind of not slavery, but we call it serfdom, nevolnictvo. And it was very different. So you see that we don't have exact milestones, but we have some distinctive features among these three periods, and you must be sure you know them all. When do we have the end of Middle Ages? So when is the end? I told you that was this approximately 15th century humanism and Renaissance, but there were many things happening. I picked up the most famous for them that we'll definitely meet with them, and you definitely should know them. Of course, don't forget to put them in your table, in your chart that you have in your assignment. If we were at the lesson, or if we had the online lesson, maybe you had with Mayo Stang lesson, with second D you had it. So this is actually a cool thing, like for a short quiz. So what were the dates? And everybody who knows it, so you'll be given one. So 1453. Uh, this date is very important because it is fall of Constantinople. You know, Constantinople was the capital of Roman Empire since the 4th century AD, and Byzantine Empire or Eastern Roman Empire had its capital city. For 200 years, last centuries of Byzantine Empire, only this town and like small surrounding vicinity of this town still kept the power. But when Ottoman Turks finally defeated it, it was the end of Byzantine Empire, Roman Empire, and big changes happened, especially in southeastern Europe. So this is by many people like world history supposed to be the end of Middle Ages. 1455, despite that very many dates, and I tell you, no, but I will tell you in 1 year when you have Age of Discoveries, interesting expedition of Chinese navigation, moreplavec Sheng He, who just couple of years, several years before these events, they sailed from China, all the southern Asia, even to Arabic lands of Ottoman Empire, and they had known the technologies of printing press. What a coincidence! We don't know why, but suddenly one German printmaker, Johann Gutenberg, invented this removable printing press, and we started with printing things. Do you know what does it mean? When we have a book, in here, and in Middle Ages, you have to write it by your hand, handwritten, illuminated. So one book was as expensive as a whole castle or a whole village with 100 peasants. Suddenly we have these books being printed, so they're much cheaper. Not anybody, but even like burghers in the towns can buy them, even priests, and they can read them. They learn languages, they study languages, and they start to understand many things. Education and spreading of information is one of the most moving things in the history, with printing, with invention of writing script in ancient times, with literacy in antiquity, with printing press at the end of Middle Ages. Then we have like invention of newspapers, of radio, of TV, of internet, of Facebook, even, as we know, even the negative aspects of it. Like too much information cannot be judged, valued by many experts, and that's a lot of rubbish. Fake news are being spread, but was not a coincidence. At the time, many things were spreading at that time, hoaxes, and fake news also anytime, and all you have to study and read it. And printing press is really cool. Johann Gutenberg. For United Kingdom, the English would definitely tell you that the end of Middle Ages for them is the Battle of Bosworth. We learned about this battle between two houses of Lancasters and Starks. No, like Lannisters and Starks. Or maybe Lancasters and Yorks. Actually, the Game of Thrones by George Martin was inspired widely by civil war in England at the end of Middle Ages called the War of the Roses. There were two houses fighting for the throne: House of Lancaster, that had their in the coats of arms they had the red rose, and the House of York, who had the silver or white rose in their coats of arms. At the end, after 30 years of terrible civil war, eventually, Richard III of York was defeated at this Battle of Bosworth. He claimed like kingdom for a horse. I exchanged like a kingdom for a horse. Didn't escape, and the Henry the Tudor from the Lancaster family married the last remaining Elizabeth of York, and they start to create a new house, new family that you may know. It's called the Tudors. And yes, Henry VIII or Elizabeth the First will be from this family. Not ruling for a long year, for many years, but in England, dramatic changes will happen because Henry VIII will actually separate from Catholic Church, establishing his own Anglican Church, and Elizabeth building up New England as we know, from modern England as we know it. For that, nothing better than this Battle of Bosworth can be a milestone of the end of Middle Ages, the dark period for them. Of course, for the world, and especially outside of the Europe, that would be rediscovery of America. Portuguese explorations of Africa, sailing to India, voyage around the world by Fernando Magalhães and his sailors, his navigators, completely dramatically changed the world history and brought Europeans from America to Australia, China, and Africa, and started brand new period of all the world history. So dramatic changes. But still, that was only 12 October now, 1492. He didn't even know and believe that it's a new world, new continent, and when he sailed back from this voyage, it was maybe, I don't know, February, March 1493. So you see that milestones are not exactly one day. It can be whole like months or period, just like with printing press, because it lasted for maybe 20 years when these printing presses were efficient, working, functional enough to be spreading. Once it was done, people start to read the Bible. And you know what happened? Okay, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. Interrupt. Prepáčte za krátke prerušenie, dúfam, že tu nebude žiadna vec. Pomáhal som ja susede s prepnutím kanálu na telku. Dobre, čiže my budeme pokračovať ďalej. Kde som skončil? So we had these milestones of the end of Middle Ages and we had this rediscovery. Again, if you're wondering why rediscover of America, we learned in this early modern period again that already in Middle Ages some Europeans had got to America before Christopher Columbus, and they were Vikings from Greenland and Iceland. Okay, what I was talking about was about printing press. That some people started to read Bible and they realized that suddenly many things that were in Middle Ages common within the church, within the Christian religion, supposed to be not true, not written in the Bible. I mean things like purgatory, očistec, indulgences, odpustky, celibacy, celibat, kňazov. These things actually were not mentioned in the Bible, not even in like ancient, like old, early Christian Roman churches, či ranej rímskej cirkvi. And many other various, even older churches like Armenian, Ethiopian, Coptic Christian churches, they didn't have these things, and as they realized, they were brand new things that Catholics, Christians introduced during Middle Ages, like the celibacy, because they didn't want papal state. Yes, Pope, he had his own state with his own army of mercenaries fighting with his own currency and so on. And they had lovers, they had mistresses, and these popes, they had sons, and they didn't want to divide their feudal kingdom of papal state. So they proclaimed that probably priests should not have women and should not have children. So that was brand new thing, and many things realized even 100 years before Martin Luther. There was John Hus in Bohemia, in Prague, who said that we should probably come back to original texts of the Bible written in Greek language, in Latin, and because they were these original words of Jesus, not the other things. So Martin Luther, he claimed the same things, and since 1517 they started big Reformation process with Protestant, Evangelical Church, and many others. Many religious wars also ended up this medieval Christianity and started new period. So that's the thing. For our history, for Slovakia, for Hungary, for Croatia, definitely that would be this battle. Battle of Mohács in 1526 was definitely the end of medieval Hungary as we know it, because after this battle, 1/3 of Hungary was occupied by Turks, by Ottoman Turkey. One part was like rebelling, Transylvania and Eastern Slovakia, and west part of Hungary and Slovakia became part of Austrian House of Habsburg, so-called the Habsburg monarchy, and that's typically early modern period. Even when we end up modern period, it's with the fall of Habsburg monarchy after the First World War. So really nice examples. Of course, you can find like many of them. For example, for Poland and Ukraine, that would be maybe uprising of Cossacks of Bogdan Khmelnytsky in 1648. For somebody, that would be actually the end of 30 Years' War, a big religious conflict, the biggest before Napoleon Wars or First World War, and that was 1648 again. So as you see, there were many things that could be this stuff. Let's talk about medieval society, because this is one important thing in here. Generally, it is being explained in the form of a graph, in the form of a pyramid, in which like couple of people in the top are the one who hold the power. Okay, I have to use this past simple form, past simple tense. They held power, and how they spread it with the power that they distributed down to the bottom, the largest amount of people who were peasants who had to work upon that. The basic thing that is easy for kids at elementary school would be the king in the top, church official, let's call them clergy, clerus, in Latin it means priests. So church official, čiže nejaký cirkevný predstaviteľ, noble, šľachtic, knights, rytieri, peasants, sedliaci. That's easy peasy. But history is not so easy, so let's analyze it in a better way. Why there was this division? Firstly, as I told you, there was this moment and this feature of feudalism. What does it mean? Feudal society was actually political, economic, and social system, because politics, it means who rule and who is ruled by the others. Economy, because there must be some production and usage of labor. Then social system, because if you are privileged, aristocratic, so noble, or if you are forever doomed to work for somebody else, and if you're rich or poor or free or non-free people in here. So it's based upon first loyalty and military service. The point was that also during the end of Western Roman Empire, imagine Odoacar, king of Ostrogoths, Peter Mikulčík and Milan Lasica. Kingdom of Ostrogoths was proclaimed. He was the king. And what did he do? What did he do later on? He couldn't rule by himself. Just like Romans, they had other like administrators, magistrates. So you had to have some other people. They didn't have specific officers. So they divided the kingdom in smaller units, and they appointed their, like, let's say, commanders to rule for each part of the kingdom. They would be called like these lords or nobility, or for us high noblemen. But even these guys, they dwell like and rule about like a large part of the kingdom. It was impossible to rule. So they again like send their knights, they're like warriors with swords and horses, typical attributes for a guy with a power. Tell them, in this valley, build a castle, build a hill fort, and you will rule about these villages in here. And because you were the only one as a knight with having a sword, you had also right to be the judge and bring the code of law code of the king from this kingdom among the peasants to rule above them. Usually they just replace, let's say, former Roman warriors. Anglo-Saxons came. So king of Anglo-Saxon, Jarl, became the first one, okay? But later on he ruled all the kingdom. So usually he just distributed his land and right to rule about the land in the form of land or a fief. To je vlastne niečo akože pôda. A ešte latinské slovo, preto to bude feudum, prídeme k tomu znovu. And they provided to the lords. Lords promised that in times of war, they will be loyal and they will bring their knights, the soldiers, to the king and fight for him for the defense of kingdom or invasion to other kingdoms. Again, knights were given smaller territories, a castle, and right to rule about peasants, pick up taxes from them, livestock, for example, and also make military from them. But for peasants, they had to persuade why they were there, why they should be their lords. Because for peasants, their knight was their lord, and the guy was because Christian priest told them to obey, and the other that these knights with swords protected them from crime, from brigands, from invasions, and so on. Okay, so this is something on like this protection is in here, and peasants, for that reason, you cannot see it, but I read it for you. Here it is written food. So peasants provided food to the knights, labor, let's say metals, and so on. Knights built up their armor, some units, and they came to fight for the lord. Because lords provided them with this fief, with land, and lords brought their army of knights to the king. And of course, if some lord wanted to be the king, so probably he was fighting the king. So this system of military service and loyalty is called vassal. So all these lords and knights were like knight was vassal of the lord and lord was vassal of the king. And even king could be the vassal of the pope or the emperor if there was somebody about this. Still, it's not enough because we know that in many countries, in European countries, this system was a bit more complicated or more various. There were many things happening there. So, for example, this is another thing, another pyramid or structure that is in here. Because king, he gives usually land and titles to the nobles. Yeah, we know that. Nobles provided land and protection to the peasants, but peasants would say, but we have been here in England like Celts and Romans like for centuries. But they were the conquerors, dominators, they were new lords. So of course they had to obey. So peasants who give rent in money and livestock or kind, čiže ako v nejakom statok, so they give this rent in money to the nobles and act as soldiers in times of war, sometimes, not always. Nobles also provided some land to the soldiers who were knights, and they served to the king like this. Okay, but new thing appeared, and that was already in Italy in 11th century, in Germany like 12th century, here in Hungary in the 13th century, just like Banska Štiavnica, Bystrica, Košice, and many others. Free towns, free cities. So kings realized that nobles were not obeying very much, and very often in the Battle of Mohacs, half of the king's army was not there because their not ruler but commander, high nobleman Jan Zapoli, he was just waiting for the battle. He would rather let king die, what actually did happen, than to help him because he wanted to be the king. So that's why kings realized they had to give privileges to some settlements, proclaim them the free towns, free cities. And these were written in the charters, Gelistini, with privileges, some kind of rights for the towns. And if they became rich, they provided soldiers and money to the kings and queens. And very often in many battles, even the Kingdom of Hungary, Štiavnica, Bystrica were the actually only real allies that sent some soldiers to the king's army, to the royal army. So you see, there were also towns, not only this. So generally, when we talk about feudal society, how it is being classified, divided, it is divided in three social groups: those who fight, those who pray, and those who work. Again, so we have notes and knights and noblemen who were fighting. Okay, but then we have again those who pray. We didn't mention that there is hierarchy also among these church officials, but some of them were leaders, some of them were monks, some of them nuns and friars, and there were zealot priests, wandering priests, there were abbots, and there were friars in the villages, and there were bishops and archbishops and many, many others. Even they were not equal. So again, there was another part of the society in this pyramid with like nobility and peasants, but there should be also towns. And again, another part was this clergy, those who pray. And again, we have those who work, peasants. But again, as you'll see, that was not the same thing. Social class was usually inherited, so it means that when you are born like a peasant, you'll be peasant for all the time. I can tell you that if we're living in, or if we had been living in times of middle society, most of us couldn't have had access to education because we would have been peasant. And definitely me, for my family, we were like, I don't know, miners, and my grandfather was working in the forge, čiže hutník bol. My mom, she was a postwoman, so kind of a servant, service guy. And Eastern Slovakia, these my grandparents are really poor peasants, nothing else. So I couldn't be like a teacher at gymnasium, like medieval school in the town. So these are things that are really being changed a lot. So that's why I decided to give you another pyramid of society that is my own version, in which I try to express even these specific things. Not only that king was not the highest, maybe in England, in Scotland, but we are also in Europe. We know there were even empires. We have also clergy, so duchovenstvo. We have also towns, and then we have people living in the lands of feudal lands, so according to the noble landowner style. So let's start from the top. I told you that king was not the highest. We know that already Roman Empire still survived in Byzantine Empire. Byzantine emperors, Caesars, felt themselves they are something higher than the kings. What happened that even learned about Francia, and there was important dynasty of Carolingians called one Karol, who is Karol Veliký, Charles the Great or Charlemagne. And this guy, he proclaimed himself to be the emperor of Roman Empire, but they call it Holy Roman Empire. For them, they symbolically restored Western Roman Empire, but they call it holy because it was not with its polytheistic pagan gods of Mithra and Jupiter, but they had this Jesus Christ and God and Virgin Mary. Since that time, especially German countries, German lands were unified in a big bunch of states that was called Holy Roman Empire. And the most important from them, we learn about them, they elected the emperor. Německý císař. So most of them, they were not very powerful guys, but sometimes they were, like Friedrich Barbarossa and some others, especially from late medieval times. And these guys were actually above them. So two guys, actually one guy who was electing the emperor was the king of Bohemia, and he elected the guy who was above him. So in the top there was no queen or king, but there was the emperor. Again, the emperors in Germany, they believed in 11th century they are the coolest. So, for example, one of them, Heinrich IV, he wanted to appoint the other guys from clergy, bishops and archbishops in Germany, according to his own will. The guys who would be loyal to him and not to the Pope. So he just started to appoint Germanovat bishops in his own lands from his own people. But for all the history of Middle Ages, Even Christianity has a kind of a structure. For them, these bishops, they elect one guy who is supposed to be the representative of God, the spokesman of Jesus and the God. And that's the Pope, the Father in Rome. And he's the only one who can appoint bishops even today. And no president, no king, no other secular government can take this right. So we can be angry about Robert Bezzag in Trnava, but that was Pope's decision, his own will. And already in 11th century, this guy Heinrich IV, he started to do that. So what Pope could do? He could take his army and invade Germany. It was impossible. So what the Pope, as a spokesman of God, could say, he just proclaimed the interdict. Interdict is when the Pope banishes you from the church. You are not Christian anymore. What does it mean? He just banished this emperor Heinrich IV. Despite he was the most powerful at the top of the pyramid of the power, he banished him from the church. For all the vassals, for the king of Bohemia, king of Bavaria, and all the princes, archdukes of Pfalz-Palatinate and Moravia and Austria and many others, he was not a Christian anymore. That's why their oath of loyalty, čiže prísaha vernosti, was not valid because he was banished from the church. So they stopped sending him money and soldiers, and they were disobedient for that. And suddenly the emperor realized that in a couple of months he lost all the power because his power was based upon the word of the church, and the church was spoken by the Pope. So that's why actually he had to come like a beggar to Italy to meet with the Pope and beg him for forgiveness. Like, please give me the power back. Only as a beggar because you're nothing more. Used to be emperor, but nobody knows that. When you don't obey the God, and I speak for the God, the Pope, so that you have to obey me. That's why I decided to put even above the emperor, the Pope, who had the ultimate power in medieval Christian Europe, because everybody was there. Apart from Byzantine Empire, because they had their own father of the church called Patriarchos in Constantinople, later on in Moscow, and they didn't accept Pope to be the representative of God. They claimed that my Patriarchos, our Pope, our father of the church, is the representative. That's why there was so-called schism. It means division of the church in West and East, Latin and Greek, Western and Eastern. We learn about this too in Byzantine Empire. What else is there? So Pope and Emperor. Okay, Walk to Canossa, investiture controversy. We learn about this stuff, all of them. Usually king was really like great thing. Of course, in Latin it called rex, but later on in many countries they start to be called the title king will be translated according to the name of this Karol, the great Karol, Král, Kirai, and many countries got it. So everybody wanted to be the king because it was like the biggest. Not all the countries were lucky enough because how can you become a king? It's not only that proclaimed like King Miron the Great, Miron the Brave, Miron the Beautiful, whatever, but the Pope is the only one who can decide whether if you can be the Pope. If not the Pope, definitely the Emperor. But even Emperor's decision must be accepted, approved by the Pope. So that was a case of Bohemia, of Czechs, who were only princes, čiže kniežata. For many years, they were fighting on the side of Germans, of German emperors, and they okay, Germans, give us the title of the king. We want to be kings. Sometimes they were given, but only for one person. So when the new prince of Przemysl dynasty became not the king, he was only prince again. So he had to fight again in Italy for Germans to be given this crown again. But what happened later on? They decided to give them the crowns, and you can inherit the title. So since the Golden Bull of Sicily, 1222. So kings of Bohemia could inherit it from pass their royal title of the king to their sons, to the princes of Bohemia. So that's why they became the kingdom. For example, Svetopluk, the many nationalistic Slovak historians want they actually believe that Svetopluk was a king, but he was never given a crown from the Pope or from the Emperor. He could be called, but that's all. He was only the prince. From the system of given titles, you cannot proclaim yourself to be the king because the others shall not accept you, and you have to be given this crown. What happened with Hungary, with Poland? King of Poland, Boleslav the Brave, conquered many lands, and he just wrote a letter. Hey, Pope, how are you doing, dude? And come on, what about like proclaiming me the king? That make me respected here in these lands, in pagan lands. I fought for you, bring a lot of pagan lands to your Christian realm. So you can, I deserve like king's crown. And king said, okay, the pope said, okay, and he sent him like a crown. So when his neighbor in the south, our king, actually Prince Stephen, the saint, yeah, I can do that too. So he wrote a letter. When Poles were given, what about us? Okay, here you are. You can be given crown. Later on, the new crown was given from the emperor of Byzantine Empire, what they believed to be Saint Stephen's crown, Svetoštefanská koruna. But they had to be given and approved from the Pope and the emperor. So let's say Wallachia, Moldavia, Luxembourg, Burgundy, they never became kingdoms. They were only archduchies, principalities. Čiže nie kráľovstva, ale kniežatstva, vojvodstva a tak ďalej. Because even there is hierarchy within nobility. Because we have so-called high nobility, and these guys are called dukes from the word duchy. Archdukes from archduchies, čiže vojvodcovia, veľkovojvodstva. It's not a kingdom. Princes, principalities, čiže znova princovia, v tomto význame kniežata, kniežatstva. Then we have lower nobility, and these guys, as you see, high nobility, lords, to lower lords, landlords who had this only one valley, one council, 12 villages, not like whole like Slovakia, for example, or Pannonia or Transylvania. And these guys were those knights, sires, earls. This comes from this Nordic Scandinavian jarl, which means grof. Baron, it's French word, and it means baron, zemepan, the same knight, rytier. For us, we use this word zemepani, alebo zemani, and this is actually very nice word. Actually, kids come from zemen, pan of the land, like lord of the land, zemepan. So zeman, okay, zemani. These guys were living in small parts like Šašov, Revište, for example. Zvolen, they had maybe archduke or big earl, we don't know. And under them, there were peasants. Usually, peasants at the beginning were free people, free men, especially in early modern period. But later on, because of rebellions, they were forced by this nobility to not to move, stay at one place. They couldn't even move to the other place. They had to work also not on their land and give the tax in the form of kind, but even to work on the noble land because they had also their own lands. And these guys peasants were forced to work even on their land, not only on their others. So even like Juraj Janošik, he was from this free man peasant, nazývame slobodníci, slobodní rolníci. But the others had to work like serfs. Serf znamená poddaný a máme ešte takú tvrdšiu formu poddanstva nazývanú nevoľníctvo. Tiež to vystihuje toto, že serfdom, už potom so slovíčkom f. Čiže toto by som možno mal prepísať rovno, aby ste si to nemýlili, že serf sú všeobecne poddaní, ale normálne takto sa to píše serf, RFS, serfs, okay? Actually, even like earl or duke was the serf of the king was the serf of the emperor, but serf in the end was actually a guy who had no right. If you wanted living in Czechia, you couldn't find yourself a woman from let's say Hont, okay, or Zvolen. So this was really tough, especially in early modern period. But as I said, some of the countries moved that they gave freedom to more of the peasants and they just pay them because they realize it's much more efficient. Okay, what about, let's talk about clergy. Of course, we will talk about it, and the popes as the heads of the church, they distributed Christianity in the way. They just sent some guy who was called bishop to some town to establish and build a church. I don't mean only kostol, but church as organization. Church with capital C, it means církev, církevná organizácia. So it's kind of organization. Because they were actually high bishops, they were called archbishops for all the country. Sometimes were called cardinals. Then there were bishops for some part of the realm. Here we had Nitra, Rožňava, Banská Bystrica, Prešov for Greek Catholic and so on. But on their level, there were also abbots. Abbots znamená opat. This is typical thing for monasteries, že kláštory a mnížské rády. And these organizations are really rich. And that's why when somebody was like the principal, the headmaster of a monastery called abbot in the abbey, so he was really powerful and rich. And they even had their own army sometimes. The most close for us is Hronský Beňadik when there was Benedictine monastery, when very important abbots in here. Later on, bishops and abbots were sending further monks. Let's say in Ilia, they built a hospital next to a small church that was called the Hospice of Saint Ilia or Saint Elia. That's why the village was called Ilia. They were monks. Bishops also were sending priests to villages and towns. At the beginning, there was one church in one village for many other villages. This case of small village Trnie near Zvolen, that was first church in whole the region. Yeah, so people, Christians from all villages had to come there. In big towns like Štiavnica or Zvolen, they even proclaimed guy who was called friar, or in Latin frater, farar, okay, or parish. So that's why parish churches in here. And these guys were really important, but lower than abbot and higher than, let's say, like common monks, maybe. Okay. And when you compare them to the others, so they're still rich, and still some of them, like hermits, pustovníci, zealot, fanatic preachers, fanatickí kazatelia, and wandering preachers, ja sa ich nazval potulní kazatelia, people who were like monks, but they wanted to live in poverty, and were wandering from one village to another, telling some words from the Bible, usually about coming judgment day and doomsday and apocalypse, because then people gave these priests, these preachers, a lot of food, and they actually were just beggars. But their social level was very low, and it was almost like peasants. And most of them, they couldn't read or write. Again, we have, okay, sorry, I had to interrupt my lesson for a while because my girls have come. Sorry for that. Actually, no, it's the end of the lesson, guys. So next lesson, because we are run out of time. So I will continue with the town description and further description of all the society Middle Ages. So that's all from me. So have a rest, guys. But if you want, if you miss history, so you can start out with this new presentation. So uh, I'm glad that you are in. That you were listening, paying attention, and stay negative in tense and positive in mind. Bye bye.